Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, merrily, merrily,
Merrily,
merrily,
merrily, life is
it's
but
but
a
a
dream.
dream. So I loved seeing that the start of your chapter that we're going to talk about today started with that song because I don't know, it just feels so appropriate. It really conjured up a really strong childhood memory for me of sticks floating down a river in
Mm,
the sort of natural area that I learned to walk in. Um, and also for me, having a 10-week-old daughter, uh, a lullaby just feels really appropriate. And then and then following that with Nagarjuna's knowledge fundamental to the middle way, like a dream, like an illusion, like a city of Gandharvas. That's how birth, and that's how living, and that's how dying are taught to be. Just completely. I have such a huge smile on my face. It just completely lit me up. I was like, that is, it's just so beautiful. It's such a beautiful way to start a chapter.
thank
Uh, yeah, it made me incredibly happy. So yeah, I mean, I guess my intuition was right. It feels like we haven't spoken for such a long time, but I always just have a really kind of fond memory of speaking with you.
you. Lovely.
Um, so yeah, I guess that's a great place to maybe begin.
Absolutely. Those two, uh, those two songs, one a lullaby and the other a doha, a
Mm,
Tibetan Buddhist song of realization, in meditation instruction set to song, are in many ways the two mirrors, facing mirrors of dreaming, because one is a dream about gentling us to sleep, helping us to cross the Rubicon into the nighttime sleeping. And the other is a dream of waking up, a dream of waking up in this waking world
mm,
and being able to come to a state of dreaming into our awakeness.
mm,
And I think that the chapter is very much about how dreaming touches all sides
mm,
of waking and sleeping,
mm,
and that at its fundamental essence, dreaming is not separated by states of sleep and states of wakefulness, but is actually something that is continuous through those dimensions of our being.
mm,
So I love that you keyed in and tuned in to those two songs at the opening. They're beloved in that way.
mm, mm. Yeah, and I really enjoyed the language because the way you're using language throughout the chapter really um, I found that it sort of mirrors that process in some way, or evokes that process in some way, where I felt at the same time that the language used is incredibly evocative, but then it's also incredibly groundless. There's a kind of groundless quality to that chapter where I kept having to pause and sort of think, well, wait, what? So it became a really interesting meditation just to read the chapter and kind of be disoriented and reoriented kind of over and over again.
Yes.
Um, hmm,
Interesting. I should say, probably for the listener, that this chapter that we're speaking about, Caesuras of Dreaming, Being and Becoming, Thinking and Imagining, is one of the 12 chapters in a book that my colleague Helen Marlowe and I just finished editing, that's entitled The Spiritual Psyche in Psychotherapy, Mysticism, Intersubjectivity and Psychoanalysis. And I think what you're describing, Richard, as I hear it in terms of the sort of groundlessness of the language that I think invites looking and looking again at what might be meant
mm,
by uh, what's offered on the page is hopefully an invitation into the confluence of mysticism, intersubjectivity, and psychoanalysis.
mm,
Um, and mysticism in the sense of the ephemeral and essential nature of things that is always ungraspable and yet beheld, and intersubjectivity as the deep study of the way that we come into being through our relationship with one another,
mm,
uh, and specifically through the intrapsychic dimension of our existence. And then psychoanalysis as one portal, one expression, one lineage of a kind of psychotherapy that looks very deeply at the unconscious process that we all are steeped in and how we come into consciousness.
mm,
So the book has an effort to weave together these three things: mysticism, intersubjectivity, and psychoanalysis in that way. And this particular chapter focusing on the different qualities of dreaming and the different modes of existence in which dreaming arise is the aim.
mm. Yeah, and I'm noticing as you're describing that, like my mind kind of at the same time as listening to you, the little kind of theoretical kind of thread kind of popped up in my mind around the unconscious,
Yes.
and I always loved the moment in the interview with Carl Jung where the interviewer sort of says, well, what's the unconscious? And he says, we don't know. It's unconscious.
The great riddle, it's the great psychoanalytic koan, really.
Mm,
What you just said.
mm,
I feel like it's the ultimate psychoanalytic koan and riddle that we study and devote an entire lineage of clinical work to the study of that which ultimately cannot be known.
mm,
And that is the play, the lila of the practice, I think, because just although the unconscious is ultimately unknown, it still can be approached
mm,
and can be attended to.
mm,
It's like making space for that which we don't know.
mm,
There's an exploration, I think, of inner space that just is like, the image that comes to mind is a kind of prayerful kneeling,
mm,
because it's like an homage to the immensity and enormity of psyche,
mm,
and that we can only approach her, but we can't know her in the sense of being knowledge based.
mm,
uh, but we can behold her, and we can treasure her, we can revere her, we can learn something about her, um, even as she remains ultimately a kind of um, mystery as
mm,
well.
mm,
But I think it's a very different orientation um, once in the realm of psychotherapy you make space for the unconscious, because there's a great appreciation that, you know, even as we're speaking in this moment and we're able to touch on things that are approachable and knowable in language on one level, that the sea that undergirds our conversation is a vast and fathomless one that cannot be grasped.
mm,
So
mm,
I think there's a deep kind of humility in a psychotherapy practice that makes room for the unconscious,
mm,
because there's a sense that our mind is so much more vast than we could know, and that is the key, that more than we can know,
mm, mm, mm,
at least what I'm sharing with you is my sense of it, of course,
mm,
my experience of it in practice,
mm,
and how it speaks to me, and why I'm so compelled by the homage to the unconscious.
mm. Yeah, and that really brings up a sense for me of receiving and being receptive to. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording, or I was it's about Martin Buber, and I've long been interested in the five skandha model in the Abhidharma. I think that's really kind of elegant, and particularly the way Trungpa Rinpoche um, articulated that process of uh, the the uh, the act of consciousness becoming a self. And I really feel that there's an interesting conversation to be had between Martin Buber and the five skandhas, because when I start to read I and Thou, he is so clearly, but with a particular theological language, but nevertheless a phenomenological language, describing the self, these two modes of self becoming, and the way he talks about the I thou relationship. The self stands nowhere, but it stands in relationship to the thou, and how, what a beautiful image that is. And then he's obviously contrasting it with the I it, and the moment the self objectifies, or that's kind of a loaded word these days, but reifies or concretizes the other, then we immediately do the same to ourselves, as I. And that's where I feel like this real conversation with Buber and the five skandhas can be really kind of rich, because obviously the Buddhist approach is typically kind of intrapsychic, or in isolation,
Yes.
typically. But Buber is obviously emphasizing so much the relationship.
Yeah. There's a really strong image that comes to mind as you're speaking for me, which is the image of a mirror looking into another mirror, and having two mirror minds
Mm,
looking into one another. And when I think about that image, it stops me, because I say, well, where is the subject?
mm,
If there's two mirrors, who's looking?
mm,
And what is he or she looking at? What are they looking at?
mm,
And I like how it sort of stops me,
mm, mm,
because there's something there.
mm. Yeah, there's an interesting digression into art with the painter Velázquez, and I can't remember the name of the painting at all, but he's painting. I can't remember when he was painting. It could be the 1600s or so, I think 1700s. But he was painting the Spanish royal family, um, and there's some really interesting visual devices there, where the artist is in the frame painting a canvas, so you're looking at the canvas within a canvas, and then there's also a doorway behind that, and then there's a couple in there, and they're looking at you, but then you realize there's a mirror in the painting, and you're looking at yourself, and there's this kind of really kind of fascinatingly layered kind of subjectivity of like, wait a minute, who who is looking at who, what is going on, and he
That's so
completely
wonderful.
dismantles the to use the acting phrase, the fourth wall. It's like, wait a minute, I'm in that painting, so like your
Yes,
sense of subjectivity is completely opened out into and now, fascinatingly, I mean, into history as well. It's like, wait a minute, I exist in the 1700s now, like, look, I'm there, and it's this really fantastic uh, kind of meditation on perspective. What does it mean to take a perspective, and who
I
is
love
taking it
it.
with who? Yeah.
And I love the how you emphasize the intersubjectivity together with the intrapsychic layers of that image, because it is about people existing in one another across time.
Mm.
And it's not just an exercise within the confines of one's own mind,
Mm.
but that it's actually a field of
Mm.
mind
Mm.
in which we are interlayered, interlaced, interwoven with other people.
Mm.
I think that's quite important in the relational turn in psychotherapy that we speak of. You know, that could say started in the late 70s and mid and early 80s. You know, but and has just been ongoing since in the literature of just being able to understand in a more grounded, and now we have a supportive theoretical matrix to appreciate the lived experience of something like that image you just so beautifully described in that painting,
Mm.
and how that is the experience of psychotherapy ultimately as
Mm.
well. It's like this sense of there's the client or the patient, and there's the therapist or the clinician, seemingly in those two seats, and yet those chairs are endlessly fluid and are very much like musical chairs
Mm.
in consciousness.
Mm.
And I really appreciate that dimension of practice. I feel like what you mentioned with your curiosity about a conversation between Martin Buber and, you know, the five skandhas, um, to me is sort of updated in that sense of the musical chairs of
Mm.
psychotherapy, because the models, like the model of psychotherapy that I was introduced to at Naropa University when I first did my master's program in the late 90s and early 2000, I think I finished up there in 2000, um, was really based on that five skandha model, was really based on the model of looking within one's own mind
Mm.
and being present for another, but really about an
Mm.
interrogation, investigation of one's own individual
Mm.
consciousness.
Mm.
And then if you shift to, you know, models of intersubjectivity, they have a beautiful model of relationality, but not always the depth model of how, of the mirror mind,
Mm.
you know, of how the mind can push the bounds to infinity.
Mm.
And so the reason I've been drawn to, for example, Wilfred Bion's work in psychoanalysis, that I included some reference to in my chapter, Caesares of Dreaming, is because for me, he's one of the few writers that really are thinkers and beings that has embraced the two dimensions of looking into the mind that goes to infinity on the one hand, and the relationship that goes to infinity on the other hand.
Mm.
And I feel like bringing those two together is sort of one of the fascinations that led me to this chapter in this book.
Mm. 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 Yeah, and I'm slightly, I just got goosebumps, and I'm slightly, what's the word? Speechless in a way, you know. And earlier when you um, mentioned the field of others, you know, I've really felt like crying at that. The the sense of immensity of that, um, and I feel it's a very kind of palpable. I think again in your chapter, you know, the way you're talking about the ocean, and I like that use of the letter O for being.
That's directly from Bion.
Hmm.
Yeah, Bion was the one to use the symbol of O
Hmm.
as his referent for the unknowable mind. the unknowable psyche, the infinite unknowable that's unqualifiable. And I think that, many things have been said about that use of that symbol O, like, oh my God, right? There's the OH exclamation point O, and there's also the O 0.0, O as in zero, as in emptiness that is full. So many things could be said about it, but I love that you keyed into that because that's a direct homage to be on.
Mm. And then it just came to mind, or hum. Yeah. Mm. Funny enough, it's something I've been kind of attending to with my daughter. At the moment, she's really early stages of vocalizing, and really there's almost sort of seed syllables of
Oh my gosh.
emotions that she will make, and so even if I'm in another room, I can kind of hear the seed syllable and the shape of her face and her mouth and her even her belly and things like that, of being delighted and really kind of happy, for example, is similar to that sense of
That
uh,
astonishment, eh?
mm, mm, yeah. Um,
It must
uh,
be so incredible getting to know her and
mm,
being able to see the world through her eyes, I would imagine.
yeah, and relating again to her as a mystery, and that it's so the the way in which, because her development is so rapid at the moment, the way in which that she is constructing her experience is so uh, kind of nakedly apparent, so vivid that,
Yeah,
yesterday she couldn't do this thing, and today there's this whole new, just fully, you're like, she can now work out that her hand can move from here and here and touch something, and it's like, what the hell was that? Or,
how
um,
cool.
yeah, and it's kind of, yeah, that amazement of seeing a self kind of coming into being in that way. Um,
Oh my
mm,
gosh, yeah.
mm,
And it never stops, you
mm,
know? Like my dad just turned 80
mm,
and my mom is 82.
mm,
And they just moved up here to California from Arizona, where they've lived the last like 12 years before a year ago.
mm,
And I moved them up here to be closer to me
mm,
so that I could be present with them in their elder years. And so we wouldn't be so far apart. And, it's amazing to me that I'm discovering who they are visit by visit
mm,
in ways that I've never appreciated, you
mm,
know? And like similarly, just to put a point on it, I was sharing with you just before we started recording that my brother passed on just this past January, and we just had a memorial for him, celebration of life this past Saturday, and I got to hear so many expressions about who he is
mm,
that were new to me, that
mm,
were brand new to me, ways of seeing him, ways of experiencing him, in his, now uh, afterlife existence in
mm,
my experience. So it never stops. It
mm,
just continues to open, I think, as
mm,
far as I know.
mm,
If we're open to it opening,
mm,
which I think is one of the keys, and I think maybe is why the goosebumps come up in sharing our mutual experience of the field of mind and its immensity and its enormity, is
mm,
because I think for me there's such relief in that being mirrored in another consciousness,
mm,
and that being appreciated and known in a direct sense, not known as in a knowable, graspable sense, but known as in appreciated deferential sense
mm,
that I feel implicitly with you, just being able to converse with you after many years of not having contact in a direct physical way.
mm,
You know, there's something that is just such a relief
mm,
to have that openness, that field of openness mirrored. So
mm,
that's gorgeous that you're having that experience with your daughter. And
mm,
so lucky to have a father who can hold that openness of her discovery of herself
mm, mm,
as you discover her.
mm, mm. Yeah, and as and I suppose I'm kind of coming back to the image you had before of the mirror looking at the mirror, because and uh, as she facilitates me discovering myself while I discover her, as she's discovering me, and and yeah, I've just got goosebumps again, and then there's the that sense of wow, who is who, who is who here.
Exactly.
Mm,
Yes, I so resonate with that expression. And I think, as we've been talking about our mutual passion for creativity as well as relationship, um, the phrase that always comes to mind in this field of experience is that of creative emergence,
mm,
and that creative emergence is what opens, if we can put a word and language to it, as the sense of who's discovering who,
mm,
um, and that emergence of that creative principle is the spark of life.
mm,
It's what makes it so engaging
mm,
and challenging.
mm,
That's the great spark, as far as I know.
mm. And so again, I loved hearing about the kind of the echoes of the song, your song in relationship to what was the name of the place again in Hawaii? The
Oh, Haleakala.
yes, and that the
In
vast sense of space, Maui, the vast sense of space, but at the same time the immensity of the physical, and the experience of the song discovering you, and you discovering the song, and the reverberance in the landscape. And again, there's this it's not just a human to human coming into being. There's this sort of multi-dimensional uh, discovery that's happening. um,
I'm so touched by your reading of that section of my chapter,
mm,
because that story, of course, means so much to me that I wanted to write about it, to capture something of the essence of the experience that you just reflected so beautifully,
mm,
of being able to come to the edge of this immense crater in Maui, Haleakala, and literally hearing a song that I had written many years before come back to me in the form of a prayer,
mm,
and being able to touch me as if it was just sung to me. And in that way, feeling the beauty of nature and spirit that includes nature and extends also beyond it,
mm,
of literally holding me in that moment and being able to sing back to me in a way that um, was a deeper echo,
mm,
opening me up.
mm,
And that was such a delightful moment, because it was like taking a moment of creativity that I had birthed at an earlier time, um, of this song, Bowing to Venus, and had literally forgotten about, as so often happens with creative work, that we have something that inspires us and touches us on a deep level, and we create something from it, and then life happens and it goes underground again. There's a song or a poem or a chapter or a painting, and it goes back into the sketchbook, or it goes back into the recording files, or what have you. Or in this case, maybe it's even released as an album, but still forgotten because it's not tended every day as the work of art. And so rediscovering it and having the universe rediscover it for me, with me, was just a great experience, because it reminded me of something about the principle of creativity, how it has this hide and seek nature. It's not just about birthing something in creative experience and having it just stay in this perfect frame so that it stays in awareness, but it does have this hide and seek nature, which I think is part of the unconscious that we were speaking about earlier, how it goes underground and how it can get buried again, but then pop up again at an unknown place, and we can have a new experience of it.
Yeah, I'm thinking again about this quality of echo, and kind of go back to the five skandha model, or just a basic kind of meditative approach, is that typically if we hear the bird song, we're kind of fully entrenched in the five skandha machinations of selfing, then we don't really hear the bird song. We're hearing this kind of conceptual echo through these various kind of veils and deeply ingrained habitual patterns and things like that. We're not in a kind of naked phenomenological contact. So that's one kind of echo, which is a kind of obscuration. But hearing you describe that song and this really years-long process of you singing a song into being, and then in that moment the song singing you into being, that's a very different kind of echo that's going on.
Yeah, and that mark of difference is, I think, what almost asks for some other word to modify echo. That because it is an echo in the sense of there's a sameness, there's a complete equality, there's an utter transparency, and yet there's this mark. When you think of, we were talking earlier about the calligraphy master that you took a picture of and created a beautiful portrait of, and his mark of the Enzo, as you humorously called an Enzo mop, right? I think of that mark of the Enzo, right? That mark of existence, and I can feel the calligraphy brush in my hand at this moment, sort of splattering on the page, and there's this sense of your energy creating that mark that's never going to come again and has never been before. That is also that part of the, to play with image and sound at the same time, that mark of the echo. So on the one hand, it's the same song singing back to you. There's an utter equality about it. And at the same time, it's a brand new moment. It's a spontaneous mark of existence in audition. And you hear something anew and it changes you. You're not the same being that you were before, and yet you are. And so that dialectic of whatever word that eludes me that I'm thinking of as you bring up the bird song, it's like it's an echo and it's a marked echo. I don't have a good word for it, but
no, I don't either.
you get my meaning. I'm grasping for the word.
Yeah, me too, because it's not, you're right, it's not an echo in the diminutive sense of the Xerox copy that's been done to death, or the cassette tape that's, the 10th copy that,
Right.
um, it's a brand new first edition that's kind of coming back the other way.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I suppose I'm curious to sort of bring that back to psychotherapeutic work and working with the client, and meet. I think a big thing for me, or something I'm holding as an aspiration as much as possible, is meeting people where they are. And meeting myself where I am. But meeting the other where they are, um, and having my own interests as a therapist, but then really, I guess again, sort of phenomenologically bracketing those to really try and be, as kind of transparent, or sort of as clear a mirror as possible for the client. And so I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts and experiences around that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because your question kind of illuminates a perspective that I have on the work that I don't know that I've quite put into words
Mm,
um, previously, or had these thoughts about until just now in this way, which is by virtue of your question, which is to play with this idea again of the marked echo, to mix visual and auditory metaphors. I feel like a big part of psychotherapy, and perhaps the beginning stages of it as we are developing clinicians, is to try to um, hold true to that need for being a clear mirror, to be a mirror that is unfettered and can reflect somebody back to themselves, to provide that more literal echo of being able to offer the reflective statement, the summary statement that captures the essence of what was said or what was offered in as clear and unfettered a way as possible, so somebody can hear themselves through you, see themselves through you. But at the same time, I feel like the next intermediate and going into stages of practice of psychotherapy is to learn that as practitioners we have our own signature, and our clear mirror is not the same as some other practitioners' clear mirror. And
mm,
we appreciate that we have our own dimension of listening and seeing that is a gift to the patient, and that to share that markedness, that distinction, that uniqueness that we bring in the seeing and hearing, I think is that whole intermediate part of practice where we realize, oh, I have my own deep subjectivity as the clinician here, and how can I make use of that and leverage that without getting in the way,
mm,
and without taking center stage, you know, um, in the big picture in terms of staying focused on the ethics of serving the client and serving the patient, to illuminate, that clear mirror. And then I think the more advanced stages of psychotherapy practice are how we weave those two together as seamlessly as possible. How that might be a session or two or three or four of privileging that sense of the clear mirror, that sense of the pure echo. And then there might be one or two sessions that are characterized by us sharing that unique markedness of reflection, that unique subjectivity of how we listen, so that I like back to that beautiful image of the painting that you shared with me earlier, that the patient, that the client, at helpful stages along the way, can see themselves being seen by you, can hear themselves being heard by you.
mm,
And I think that that is a whole layer of psychodynamic, transpersonal practice integrative, intersubjective, intrapsychic practice that brings together that integrative capacity or that integral function, where the echo and the markedness come together. Not only for the practitioner who's sitting in the clinician's seat in the musical chairs that we talked about earlier, but also being able to hold that for the patient, so that one day, they will leave that chair, leave that office, leave that couch, leave that seat. And even though they won't be returning to that seat necessarily, they'll be carrying with them the image of that intrapsychic unfolding and the sense of how that's changed their sense of self and their sense of self in relation to the person that they saw.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and there's something about that that's sort of stunning me on some level, or stopping me, pausing me. And thinking back to my own ongoing training, and the first time I was a therapist, I was coming at it much more like you were describing earlier, as very much kind of the five skanda kind of embodiment, which is just like, well, I'm here, I'm clear, I'm present, rock and roll.
Right?
What more do you want, And I got some really useful feedback, which was that, it's like, well, you seem really kind of all those things, but you also seem really distant and kind of rigid. And I was like, oh, really? So the next session, I kind of came in, and something had shifted, I think, because of my personal therapy, and I had a completely different session, as therapist. And I realized, like, oh, the only thing that shifted is not some technique I'm doing or whatever. It's I'm taking a different relational position, and before I'd kind of been aware of that as a kind of more of a conceptual thing, like, oh yeah, there's different relational positions and so on and so on. But actually having that kind of palpable, subjective, intersubjective experience of, oh, me standing in a different relational position, I've not done anything differently, but somehow the whole thing is radically different.
Yeah. I can relate to that evolution of psychotherapy practice. I feel like it's been um, a part of my own development as well as a psychologist and psychotherapist to learn that the patient and the client needs to see my face.
Hmm.
That the patient, that the client needs to see your face,
Hmm.
that they
Hmm.
need to see the specificity of you,
Hmm.
the specificity of who you are. There's a way in which I can't know myself as the client or as the patient until I know my unique impact on you as my
Hmm.
therapist.
Hmm.
And for that to happen, paradoxically, you need to be not a clear mirror at all,
Hmm.
but a very um, specific image that is unique to you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Your unique signature, your unique mark, your unique fingerprint.
Hmm.
And I think that's hard to for me anyway. That's been hard to learn because because it's hard to show up.
Hmm. As you said that, I kind of took a big inhale of breath and felt like the the vulnerability of that, oh my God, they're going to see me, wait a minute, this is, when did this,
Right.
yeah.
Right, because the belief or the thought is that, it's the person in the patient's seat that is the hot seat,
Hmm.
right? That it's the patient's seat that's the hot seat, the seat that in musical chairs is, being
Hmm.
uh, lunged at to try to grab a seat to be seen. And it's astonishing and remarkable to realize how deeply and intimately we are being seen
Hmm.
as the clinician.
Hmm.
Um, Even in our clear mirror stance,
Hmm.
you know, that clarity can become so clear that you vividly appear
Hmm. Hmm.
to the other person.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of what, uh, well, there's all kinds of ways that shows up in the practice.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that, and I'm thinking of some teachers I've had in the past, and but the image that came to mind there, I mean, if you have a really clear mirror, but then you just put one thing, it could be that really stands out. It's like, well, there's zoom straight in there. So yeah, as soon as your
So,
uniqueness comes in, oh, whoa.
exactly so. Exactly so.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, another thing to kind of staying on topic but shifting, I suppose, is that
Mm.
I loved your use of that word, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, caesura.
Yes, Caesura.
Um, and this really, again, this um, the way that that word evokes those two mirrors being in front of each other. This caesura of. Then I kind of started to read, and then I thought, wait a minute, I don't know which way am I facing here? What, well, we usually have a very kind of one directional conception of dreaming, right? Which is like, well, I go to sleep and then I dream. Um, and I mean, it reminded me of an experience I had years ago, probably 20, yeah, it must have been 20 years ago, where I was asleep and on my side, and I heard this whistle right in my ear, like as if a person had whistled, like real directly and from like an inch away from my ear. And I woke up, and as I was kind of coming off bed and coming upright, where my head was, then and I opened my eyes, I could see myself was there as a sort of entity looking at myself for kind of eye to eye. And then this entity just kind of reversed backwards through the doorway while waving at me. Um, and for some reason, your description of this caesura of dreaming and the where really does the dream begin and end, and who is dreaming who, and um, that it kind of called that experience back, as well as lots of others actually. But and the bird song I mentioned earlier being an echo and being like a dream, and so there's so much. But so I'd love for you to maybe riff on that
Yeah.
feeling of caesura.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that image from your dream. That's incredible. That's such a poignant and beautiful illustration of the unknowable, ungraspable, and nevertheless recognizable dimension of the mystery of being.
Mm,
Um, I love that sense of uh, you looking in the mirror of your own face
mm,
and having that image recede and wave to you. It seems like a very vivid image of this image we've been speaking about the mirror looking into the mirror, or the two mirrors facing one another, looking into one another, to take the directionality out of it. Um, and that is the gap. Caesura literally means like gap or pause. In its poetic context, it means the pause in a line of poetry. And in its musical context, it means like a pause or a space where there's no audition. And it's in that gap, in that space, in that pause, that illuminates a deeper order of being. I think that, there's some examples of Caesura, to offer a few others, are like when the tide goes out and it reaches that end point of going out before it goes in. That's like a Caesura, or a gap, or a pause, or a space. Or we could say like the heartbeat when is pulsing, that space between beats is like a caesura of the heartbeat. Or we could say like another example would be in our very breathing, the caesura or gap between the in-breath and the out-breath, that point at the apex of the breath that is undefinable and in the process of turning in some way, but still. And that's another example of caesura, or gap, or space. And so when I say caesuras of dreaming and being, becoming, thinking, and imagining, it's an effort to have all four of those mirrors look into each other, of being and becoming, our very thinking as an expression of dreaming, as well as our imagining as an expression of dreaming. And I think that the imagining is most often familiar to us as thinking about dreaming, and sometimes becoming can be familiar to us as a kind of dreaming. But I think that it's harder sometimes for us to recognize or to consider our very being as an expression of dreaming, and our very thinking, in this moment, as an expression of dreaming. So the term caesura was meant to enfold those four dimensions together in this kind of, mirroring process of dreaming. There's something about the gap and the pause and the space that reveals that which is marked and articulated.
Hearing that, I feel disoriented and afraid and joyful all at the same time.
Yeah, I think that captures it very well. There's a groundlessness, to return to your experience of some of the writing. There's a groundlessness in that
recognition.
Exactly. And I dare say at the same time that there's a light.
And I really love hearing you articulate that, and again in that way kind of sing that into being, and I mean, I think it's something, this is a bit more of a theory thing or something, but I often feel that because Buddhism challenges the practitioner to bracket their meaning, then very often, seemingly, people get the sense that what Buddhism is saying is that ontologically the universe is meaningless,
Mm.
is devoid of meaning. And then there's a kind of very real threat of a kind of nihilistic depression that would
Absolutely.
understandably kick in there. And I really love hearing you present something incredibly different to that.
Thank you.
Mm,
Yeah, I think it's where that sense of divinity comes from.
mm,
When I talked about dreams as being divinity encrypted, which is a direct homage to one of my mentors, Dr. James Grotstein, who I had the privilege to have a few conversations with at the end of his life, in the
mm,
last 4 or 5 years of his life. And he used this term encryption when he talked about dreaming quite a bit. And he had the book, Who is the Dreamer Who Dreams the Dream?
mm,
Was the title of his book, which I love and just fall into again and again. It's
mm,
talk about a singing into being. The title of his book, Who is the Dreamer Who Dreams the Dream? Just thrills me as a song to sing,
mm,
uh, because I feel like it gets it very well, because of course it asks it as a question. And so it invites us into that experience.
mm,
And, and that is what opening does. Opening invites us into an experience.
mm,
And that invitation more deeply into experience is the field of divinity, this um, unfathomable gift to have a face
mm,
that is our original face. But it shines as this mark.
mm,
And that's just such a gift.
mm,
It's such a gift to have this specificity of who we are,
mm,
this particular expression of divinity that is who we are. And it is that uniqueness of the spark of who we are um, that I think we're seeking just as much as that field of openness.
mm, mm,
We're seeking that field of openness in part because we're seeking our true face,
mm,
which is coming back to your image of that painting again. It's the whole painting, including the seeing and the being seen that's off the canvas.
mm,
It's the entirety of it. It's the infinity of the dimension of that picture that has no edgedness and no boundary.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, how can you paint a painting that has no edges? You know, well, there you go.
My parents had an infinity pool behind their house in Arizona, and I used to love staring at the edge.
Mm,
I
yeah.
used to love staring at it, just looking at it into the sunset,
Mm, mm,
just loving it.
mm. Well, I'm looking forward to the book coming out, and I'm going to have to check out some of the people you mentioned as well. I'm looking forward to digging into those.
Cool.
Um, yeah, when is the book coming out, and what's a good way for people to kind of connect with your work online?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Mm,
It should be coming out in November or December
mm,
of 2020,
mm,
and it'll be published by Routledge Press.
mm,
And I will have a link up to the pre-order page um, on my website, which is drwillowpearson.com, just Dr. Willow, Pearson.com. I have a tab for books,
mm,
and I'll have a link to the book there.
mm,
And I suppose people could also find it directly through the Routledge website if they typed in the spiritual psyche in psychotherapy.
mm. Perfect.
Yeah, thank
Perfect.
you.
And I'll include links to that where I can as well.
Lovely.
Mm.
Thank you so much for sharing about the work.
Mm.
It's a joy to be able to speak with you about it.
Mm.
And so appreciative of your holding it with the depth with which you do.
Mm. Thank you. And yeah, it was just a privilege to spend some time with you, and appreciate your perspective on things.
Likewise, Richard.
Thank you very much. All right, bye for now, Willow.
Bye for now.